Welcome to this week's Desk Side Chat. The topic of conversation for this week is knowing your practice metrics. Those of you who've been following along this entire time know that a big part of what we are trying to do is to help good advisors become better business owners. As we all know, in the long run, in order to serve your clients, in order to be successful, you have to be both a good advisor and a good business owner. And when it comes to being a good business owner, we all know it's important to know how your business is running, knowing the inside and out of your practice. And so we are excited this week to have a special guest joining us who's going to help share a little bit about what she is doing to help small businesses look into their numbers, understand a little bit more about their business. Stephanie Magurno, you and I were introduced a couple months back, and I've now launched this new business, and you've helped kind of look at some of the things that I'm doing. And I think you're a great resource that advisors can tap into and learn a lot from. But if you could just start out, we were talking a little bit about your background. If you could share a little bit about your background, we'll start there and then we'll jump into the conversation.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, John. I'm super excited to be here. And so my background is that I've grown and scaled 4 different organizations and businesses, 2 of which I've co-founded, 2 in the not-for-profit sector and 2 in the for-profit sector. My partners and I owned a brick and mortar multi-unit bar and restaurant group. And now I've shifted gears into consumer packaged goods. I actually am one of the co-owners and the COO of a cannabis extraction company, licensed, fully legit here in Nevada, where I live. And basically, I run the company on 10, 15 hours a week. So I thought, now it's time for me to team up and work with other entrepreneurs to help them optimize and grow and scale their businesses. So that's what I do with my time with Cultivate Advisors. I'm a small business advisor, and I help people succeed and achieve their vision for their business.
So I guess as you start to engage and talk through getting into the numbers with a small business, and maybe somebody who hasn't really spent a lot of time looking into the numbers of the business, what are some of the biggest things that stand out to you, some of the biggest mistakes that you see people making?
It's a great question. First, I want to share a quote with you that I really like. It speaks to what you were saying at the beginning about working on advisors being not only great advisors, but great business people. This is actually a quote from Henry Ford. And he said, "Business must be run at a profit, else it will die. But when anyone tries to run a business solely for profit, then also the business must die, for it no longer has a reason for existence."
How have I never heard that quote? Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I like it too. I recently heard it myself. And I think it's very powerful, because if all you're focused on is the money, that's not enough. But if you don't focus on the money, you won't even be in business.
Right.
So the numbers are really important. And what I see, kind of 4 different stages of development, and there could be people listening to this or watching this that are in any one of these stages. So number 1, you've got the financials are a black hole. I don't even think about the numbers. I just hope that there's money to pay myself at the end of the month, the year. Then you've got financials, stage number 2, financials managed kind of reactively. So maybe that's, oh yes, we do our bookkeeping, and then, we see like, oh gosh, what can we do? Can we pay for X? Can we pay for Y? Do we have enough money? So it's sort of reactively managing the numbers and the finances. Then there's stage 3, where, you're working on a more planned basis. You've got budgets, you've got some financial plans, and then there's the highest level of financials being led with a dedicated accounting professional, a CFO, a controller, with systems in place. So there's and of course you could break that down further or say there's additional stages. I don't want to put any entrepreneurs in a box. We don't like that. But in general, those are kind of the 4 stages that I see. And it is kind of surprising even how many people in the financial services don't have a great handle on their numbers. That's just, it's like you're used to looking at maybe what the PE ratio is or something for some stock you want to invest in, but looking at your own numbers is a different matter, and looking at it from a business perspective. And, to round out my answer to your initial question, one of the common things I see with companies that are new is not really looking at what their hourly rate is. I mean, you could be earning $9 an hour your first year in business, and really looking at how much am I working, how much am I getting in return. And it's very common the first couple of years that it's going to be lean. That's the way it goes. But you do have to pay yourself something, and then look at, well, how do I increase the value I'm getting per hour? How can I go from 9 to 70 to 150 to 1,000, and looking at the steps needed to do so.
So can you give us a little bit of a tease in your process of how you go through those steps, how you help somebody
Absolutely.
through that?
Yeah. So interesting. I want to share a few metrics for the advising industry. So, with the industry benchmarks this is for investment advice. I know that there's portfolio managers, there's different kinds of advisors, but for the NAICS investment advising code, here's some industry benchmarks overall. This is across the United States. This is regardless of size. There's a net profit margin of 26%. So after you take all your revenue and you take out all of your expenses, net margin average is 26%. The average monthly net profit for employee is $8,322, with an average current ratio of 4.1. Revenue spent on payroll 35%, revenue spent on marketing 2%. Then the companies that are a little smaller, under 1 million in revenue, it changes slightly. Net profit margin is 26%, so that's pretty standard with the other. But where it starts to get interesting is the monthly net profit per employee drops to 4,351. The current ratio is 4.8. Revenue spent on payrolls 30%. So I'd like to share those numbers because, one of the things that we have to look at is not only you can't use numbers in a vacuum. There is no, well, this is the right margin. In trucking, you'd be lucky to have a 4% margin. But if you are in a different industry, a service-based industry, like advising, you expect a higher margin than that. So number one, knowing how you stack up compared to your industry averages gives you a sense of, are you on the right path? What are some areas you could improve? And this is an average. Some are always going to be better. Some are going to be not quite there yet. And so when you look at, number one, I always want to look at profit. Got to put profit first. So looking at your revenue, deducting all your expenses, figuring out what your profit is. So that's one aspect. But the second thing that I like to do is a break-even analysis. And, for that, we're looking at what are your variable costs and what are your fixed costs. If you're renting an office and it's $5,000 a month, that's a fixed cost. Whether you make a single dime, you're still paying that monthly rent. So if we take the fixed costs, then we have the variable costs. Maybe you're paying fees for your software, you're paying, fees for trades you do, whatever your fees are could vary according to your work. You wouldn't be paying for the software if you didn't actually have clients. You wouldn't be paying those transaction fees if you weren't making those investments. So figuring out, okay, so if my rent is 5,000 and my variable expenses are, let's say they're 5% of the revenue, then I know I need to make X amount of money in order to cover my monthly nut, right? So you know what your break even is. And from then on, it's just how much of that is going to me and how much is being reinvested in the business. So I have a degree in accounting, but I'm an anomaly because I look both ways, backwards and forwards. Most accounting is all looking forward backwards and most finance is all looking forwards. So I advise people to do their bookkeeping every single month. If you're operating a solopreneur type firm, that could be an hour that you spend a month max, just putting everything into QuickBooks or even a spreadsheet. But if you have accounting software, all the better. And then just making sure you're on track, set goals. And how are you progressing in relation to those goals? What is your net profit for that month? Have you been able to pay yourself? All of these things. And then as you progress, then you start looking at, okay, what is our monthly net profit for employee? And it allows you to make some smart decisions. That's kind of some of the areas I would start with to answer your question.
It makes sense. Last week, we stepped out a little bit. I had a friend join us who's a dentist, and I think there's so much overlap between what we're doing and other small businesses, and I think we can learn from so many different areas. So it's important, as you said, to benchmark in the industry. What about benchmarking outside of the industry? Other outside peer groups, maybe whether it's a dentist, a accounting practice, other things outside of a financial planning practice. How does our industry stack up, or how would you look at benchmarking, beyond just a specific peer group?
That's a great question. The thing about benchmarks is it's a starting point. It's not the end all be all. It's not as though, well, I hit 27% net profit margins. I'm 1% better than the industry average, so I'm set. I don't need to look at anything ever again.
Right.
And I don't have the numbers handy to look at, accounting practices, dental practices, etc.
I'm just thinking, like, in your
However,
experience, other businesses that you've worked with.
yeah,
I
it's
mean,
pretty common.
generally.
Yeah, it's pretty common for service professionals like accountants, like financial advisors, like attorneys, to have kind of, higher margins than a brick and mortar traditional capital intensive industry. If you're a manufacturer, you're in trucking, you are in some of these industries where there's a lot of capital outlay, then the margins tend to be a lot lower. So that is pretty common that you'll have comparable margins. Now, if you're a solopreneur, you actually might have higher net profit margin, but you're making a lot less money actually. So, these are looking at more like general solopreneurs, firms, etc. And I think that it's always useful to look at other industries and learn from them, whether that's going out to lunch with your friend who's a dentist and swapping war stories, or whether that's looking at another industry and looking at what they might do differently. How do they achieve those higher results? Thinking outside the box and not limiting yourself. So, you might look at how is it that the taking an accounting practice, for example, you might have CPAs, you might have people with accounting degrees, but that aren't CPAs. So they have different tiers of staff that do different work. They don't need the CPA doing books for their client. And so looking at, is there something we can learn from that in the financial advising side? How do we apply that principle? You see the similar thing with dentists. You see the same thing with doctors' practices or attorneys. They have paralegals, right? You've got dental hygienists and dental assistants. So is there something we can learn from that? That would be an example that I might look at.
And something that has come up quite a bit. We talk about outsourcing. We talk about potentially adding staff, adding resources prior to maybe needing them. So
Yeah.
in that projecting forward, when it comes time to potentially add staff, how do you determine, or how do you help your clients determine the right time? Because that can be so challenging for a lot of advisors.
Absolutely. You are totally right. And I'd say there are a few guiding principles. It can vary from company to company, but this is one of the most common things that I deal with my clients who are looking, who are on a growth trajectory. And I run my business by the numbers, and that's how I encourage my clients to do the same. So this is why the forecasting is important. So if you have a certain amount of revenue that you've been generating per month, you have a certain amount of expenses, what your fixed costs, your variable costs are, making a forecast and looking at a forecast from a couple different perspectives. So let's say that we make a forecast where everything stays on the trajectory it's going. Maybe that's a 5% or 10% per month growth trajectory, and things are looking good. Then we make another scenario where, what if it's better than that? And then we make a third scenario, what if it's worse than that? So we can look at, gut check where we think it's going to be, best case and worst case. Then we'll look at how much would it cost us to bring on this person that we're looking at? And can we do that in the best case? Can we do that in the gut check? Can we do it in the worst case? And we also look at not only how the profit will change as we bring this person on, but we look at cash in the bank, and we look at, managing cash flow. So why this is important is that, let's say you bring someone on to a new role and it takes them time to get up to speed. They aren't necessarily going to be generating the full potential revenue that they could after 6 months or a year. So there's going to be an upfront investment in that. And if you know that, and you think, okay, 6 months is going to cost me $30,000 to bring this person on, and they might not even generate $30,000 in revenue, do we have the money in the bank to support that? And then, assuming that we do, what about that gut check scenario? Is that can we continue to pay them after that? So, really having a handle on where you're at financially and what it will take, and then also looking at, it's important to check in on that regularly, because maybe after 3 months you realize this isn't working. Maybe there's a pandemic and everything you've ever thought you knew has changed, and you're no longer able to afford to have a person there, and you've got to make a hard call. But checking with it regularly, not just waiting for 6 months to go by and realizing you can't afford to keep them. So knowing kind of what the ramp up period will be, knowing what your cash in hand is, knowing your different scenarios. So those are a variety of considerations that I would look at, as well as what the realistic growth pattern is. If you've been bringing on 4 clients a month for the past 5 months, then it's realistic to think you can continue to do that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it's important, and I wanted to, I guess, continue along that vein. So we're projecting out, looking at growth, looking to add. Something else that we see fairly commonly is advisors who maybe overreach in some ways, and maybe we can talk a little bit about staffing and human capital.
Yeah.
But certainly technology wise, we see that a lot, where advisors get really excited, go to a conference and buy the latest, greatest, whether it be a planning tool, whether it be a software for managing portfolios, what have you. And some of these things, it starts to add up. You add, all these different things. So I guess, how do you analyze, I guess maybe, again, we could look at, if you want to, the human element behind it, but let's just, for now, the technology component. If I have an established practice, I'm projecting out, and you're helping them, Stephanie, look at their business, and you're seeing, maybe a little bit extra overhead, or some of these things that may not be additive. How do you help people address that?
So I would look at that from a couple different perspectives. One thing I definitely do with my clients is look for ways to save money, which can be changing vendors. It could be anything from changing software to buying something from a different manufacturer. You never know. But if somebody's in that case, because it's more common for people to be under technologied, understaffed in my experience. But in the opposite case, what I would do is have to have some tough conversations. But we would look at it from a couple different perspectives. So one is, are they spending too much money on this technology currently, but it's needed to get where they want to go, and they're going to get there within a reasonable period of time. Sometimes you have to always make this call of, when do I get the thing that I know is needed but is expensive? Am I at that point yet? Am I not? So if somebody's got it and maybe they're 3 months out from their revenue, being able to match the spend, maybe that makes sense depending on their cash in hand. Maybe that makes sense according to their numbers, and then it's worth it. Now, if it's the kind of thing where it's going to take a couple of years to get to that point, then we should look at the alternative. So we have to look at how much time is it saving, and we have to look at what their financial resources are. So, it doesn't make sense to, for example, if somebody's spending 5 hours a week on their bookkeeping to save $25 a month on QuickBooks, that doesn't make sense. That's an easy, you have to have your time back. You need to just pay $25 a month for the software. If somebody's spending $25,000 a month on a software that's going to save them 10 hours a month, probably not worth the return on investment. So we have to look at, the time invested as well as the money, and is it worth it? And then we also have to look at, can their financials support it? So do they have the runway until the two catch up? Does I know this is general. I don't have a spreadsheet in front of me with all these numbers plotted out to show you what that looks like, but that's what I would literally do.
And hopefully, as I was joking with you earlier, we can get you to engage inside the group with our members, and we can maybe start getting into some, at least examples at a wider level, and then maybe even some one-on-one conversations can generate from that. But for now, keeping it more general, I think is just good to kind of set the stage. When it comes to in this is another general thing. There's so many different practices out there. There's, multiple advisor practices. There are advisors who are part of a collaboration, a larger group. There's advisors, solo shops out there. Rule of thumbs, generally speaking, where do you start hitting thresholds where it makes sense to, not just look, everyone should be looking at the numbers, but where it makes sense to actually have somebody that is a dedicated person to help with that, as opposed to just simply looking at QuickBooks, like you said, once a month and analyzing numbers. Like, do you have a general range of kind of where an advisor might fall revenue wise, where they need to actually have a person helping them?
That's a good question. I don't think that there's a cut and dry answer. So, you've got the occasional very successful solopreneur advisor making $700,000 a year.
Yeah.
And could they handle their books themselves? Probably. They're a solopreneur, but when they're making that much, why not pay a professional to manage it for them, right? On the other end of the spectrum, you have somebody who's just starting out, who just started their practice, maybe isn't in a position to afford to bring somebody on. So then you've got the firms where they have a lot of staffing. So there's kind of a rule that I like to use, which is hire externally for skills you don't have, hire internally for skills you do. So, when I reduced my role running my companies as the COO and controller, in terms of my time commitment, I hired a bookkeeper. I didn't hire an outside bookkeeping firm because I'm an accountant. It's a skill I own. I don't need, an outside firm doing this. I have an internal bookkeeper doing it, and I do the month-end review and close out and find any errors and fix them, etc. So, but if that kind of accounting isn't your expertise, then you might look for an outside bookkeeping firm. And if you're small, you could be paying $500 a month for an outside bookkeeper, because you're not doing a high volume of revenue and expenses. So, it's about how much time is it costing you? How much money is it costing you? And you look at, okay, how much, if you're spending 5 hours a week on it that you could be spending generating revenue, and it's going to cost you $500 a month to have a bookkeeper, maybe that makes sense. That you're looking at this from, if I had 20 hours a week to generate revenue, I could generate a lot more than $500 in a month. So maybe this is the point at which I hire that outside bookkeeper. If you are a company that has multiple employees, you're dealing with payroll, you're dealing with, a higher volume of revenue, maybe $500,000 and up, that's when you might want to start looking at hiring an internal actual accounting person to be on your staff. So if you're above 500K, that's when you might need somebody internal. So before then, maybe you have this outside bookkeeping firm, and not that you can't keep a great outside bookkeeping firm as you grow, but at a certain point, it might be more cost effective just to hire your own bookkeeper, or because you've got extra things you want them to do on a more like payroll administrative side, that might also come into play. Certainly once you're over a few million, you're going to need a full-time bookkeeper.
Yep. So I guess one thing that comes up quite a bit when we're talking about end clients, right? There's a lot of clients working with an advisor who probably have the skills and capacity to do things that they would need, but having that objective advisor, having that objective party is important for, I would argue, most end clients out there. How important is it to again, aside from, thinking of these thresholds, 500,000, 700,000, just for anyone, any advisor out there to have an objective analysis on their book. Like, I'm just thinking, examples that you may have come across where just getting that independent analysis, getting somebody from the outside, that objective view, how important is that in your mind for an advisor?
I think it could be critical. It can be critical to the point where it can transform your business. I did a free advising session for a financial services company. They do payroll, bookkeeping, taxes, and like I said, people in the accounting field tend to look backwards. So the owner of this company, they've been in business for 37 years, and they make a profit. The owner makes money. It's a good business, but the owner is working 60 hours a week and doesn't have time to grow her business. She's too busy working in it in order to be able to work on it. So, looking at these numbers, in our free advising session, it became very apparent that she has the resources to hire a sales rep. She literally didn't realize this. She was just looking at the fact that, oh my God, they're going to cost a lot of money, and are they going to bring in a return? And she, had some bad experience hiring a sales rep previously. So looking at her cash in the bank, looking at her profit margins, looking at how much, because I do know payroll sales people, like how much they should be producing in a year and a month, and using that back of the envelope math, it became very clear that they could afford to hire a sales rep. And so this would be huge in terms of growing the business. So you never know what's going to be uncovered. So I say it can be transformational to literally have somebody do that. And in my case, it was a free 2-hour advising session. You could also hire, somebody who's got some advising expertise in the accounting world to look at this and pay them $1,000. It might make you hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that. So I think that it can be worth it, not necessarily when you're just starting out, but maybe when you're in that like second or third stage of reactive, or in terms of the looking forward, but not quite at that CFO and systems level yet. That can be really helpful.
And I would argue even on a more mature practice, because something that we've talked about a lot over the last couple of weeks, and we'll continue to talk about a lot, is succession planning and looking at transitioning a business. And you have some of these, early on, you have an advisor who the value proposition is, it's me, it's my unique skill set and what I bring to the table. But as things move along and mature, it's important to start looking at systems and processes and things that can transition on. So I think it's so important, even for a mature practice, to really get a good handle on these things. Some may not have, unfortunately, for quite some time.
There are a lot of ways to value a business. I'm sure you're familiar with this in, given your professional expertise. And, sometimes you'll hear things like 3 times EBITDA, etc. But if the business revolves around the owner, it will get less of a valuation than if it doesn't. You could look at the value of a business being, if the owner can run it on 10 hours a week or less, it has a lot more value. I've heard other people look at it as their EBITDA times the number of years that the business will survive without the owner, or like different parameters for this. And so having systems in place is essential. And so if you're a 4th stage advisor and you're looking at an exit, or you're looking to kind of retire, collect your partnership proceeds and be on the golf course or the beach, then 3 to 5 years away, that's when you really do need to start working with somebody to make sure that you can get the maximum valuation, put the systems in place in order to have the greatest return there, for sure. And it can be even helpful to have an outside expert come in and do a business valuation. That can be free to cheap, just to kind of get a sense of what it would be worth, where your pain points are, what you need to solve to get it even higher.
Yeah, such an important topic, and so much of what we're talking about is getting that outside analysis done. That's come up here recently, where we talked to one advisor who had a very, very different valuation from the parent firm versus getting an outside analysis. So, that's obviously important. And then 3 to 5 years out, like you're saying, Stephanie, that's something that we just keep bringing up. I posted this the other day. When's the best time to start planning your succession plan? It's before clients start asking. The second best time is after they start asking, because it's going to happen, right? It's
Yes.
inevitable, and it's so important to control that and own that. And I guess, in the beginning, you shared, and we go into this too, the cobbler shoes scenario, where these advisors have such a great grasp of helping their clients retire, do all these things, but it's it's so important for them to focus on the business. And that quote from Henry Ford is awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
So the group itself, like I said, we're going to hopefully be able to tap into you a little bit more deeply. But this particular portion of the meeting is public, and we're happy to share this outside. So Stephanie, for somebody who's part of our group or outside, if they want to engage with you and work with you and your team, how would they do so?
So the best way is reach out to me, and my email is Stephanie, Stephanie, M, as in my last name, Magurno, Stephanie M at cultivateadvisors.com. I do free advising sessions for businesses, 2-hour deep dives, businesses of a certain size that are really motivated to accomplish a goal, whether that's an exit, growth, getting their time back and their life back because they're working so many hours a week, et cetera. So reach out to me by email. I'm happy to chat with you and see if it makes sense to do one of my deep dives. And so that's the best way.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. And we're going to now open it up to members to do our backstage pass portion. But thank you so much for joining us, Stephanie. Really appreciate your insight.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been great.